He was among sovereigns what Shakespeare was among poets. He was not only the wealthiest monarch in the world, but he was also the greatest ruler of his time. Elizabeth I of England, Henry IV of France, and Abbas I of Persia were great monarchs of the 16th century. But none excelled him either in idealism or in the conception of his duty, or even in concrete achievements. That is how historians describe the greatest Mughal emperor of India, Akbar the Great, just one of the illustrious embodiments of the ascended Master El Morya, chief of the Darjeeling Council of the Great White Brotherhood. These are the embodiments of our illustrious sponsor, our beloved Guru. He was one of the sons of Enoch. He was a master mason who worked on the Great Pyramid about 10,500 to 2,500 BC. He was Abraham, 2100 BC. Melchior, the 1st century BC. King Arthur, 5th century AD. Thomas Becket, 1118 to 1170. Sir Thomas More, 1478, 1535. Akbar the Great, 1542, 1605. Thomas More, 1779 to 1852. The Master M, El Morya Khan, who lived in India in the latter 19th century and ascended in about 1898. Today, in honor of our Guru and our founder, we are going to take up a joyous journey through the heart and mind and life and career of Akbar. Akbar's full name was Abul Fath Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Akbar. Abul Fath Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Akbar. He was born in 1542 in Sindh, now in Pakistan. Mind you, just 7 years after the execution of Sir Thomas More. He didn't have too much time to be a saint in heaven. 2 years before Akbar's birth, his father, the Mughal ruler Humayun, had been driven from his capital of Delhi, India, by a rival chieftain. During his exile, Humayun traveled through Persia and Afghanistan, seeking military support to regain his throne and territory. But his greatest hope for reviving Mughal fortunes lay in his newborn son, Akbar. On the occasion of Akbar's christening ceremony, one Hindu chieftain announced, "Our astrologers predict for you, O luster of the eye of Humayun, a long and prosperous reign, equal in glamour to the majestic authority of Alexander and Ashoka." Muslim astrologers agreed that Akbar's reign would mark the acme of Mughal glory. I've sorted out from this lecture today, from the quotes of 3 historians, words that I want to be certain you have the meaning of. And since our school children of all ages are also listening to this lecture, this is vocabulary for them. So our first vocabulary word out of the lecture today is acme. Acme. It's the highest point or stage, one that represents perfection of the thing expressed. Acme. And so the Muslim astrologers agree that Akbar's reign would mark the acme, the very height of Mughal glory. Now, a Mughal is an Indian Muslim of or descended from one of the several conquering groups of Mongol, Turkish, and Persian origin. Mughal, You can see it on the screen. The spelling is Mogul, and this is the pronunciation, Mughal. To give you greater insight into the character and life of Akbar, I shall read from 3 biographies of the emperor. They are written by Muni Lal, Ashurbadi Lal, Srivastava, and Vincent Smith. The second name was Ashurbadi Lal Srivastava, and Vincent Smith. Akbar then was a precocious boy. Precocious. That's the next word that I want all of us to remember. Precocious, exceptionally early in development or occurrence, exhibiting mature qualities at an unusually early age. Akbar was a precocious boy. Munilal writes, those who had the opportunity to observe Akbar at close quarters tended to believe that he was the reincarnation of some saint or seer. There was the conviction among the religious elite that a Hindu sage had taken birth in the person of Akbar to bring about unity in the heterogeneity that was Hindustan or northern India. Heterogeneity. Heterogeneity. That is the pronunciation. You see the spelling. It's the quality or state of being heterogeneous or mixed. Heterogeneity. So there were many different peoples, a mixture of peoples in India at that time. As Akbar matured, he became fascinated by animals, especially the camel and the elephant. Lal writes, many a famous elephant was fed personally every day by Akbar on costly preparations to improve their strength and stamina. Often he drove elephants plied liberally with strong alcoholic drinks. He managed to get from somewhere quite a bit of alcoholic beverages and gave them to the elephants to drink. Experienced drivers feared to take such liberties as the youthful emperor used to take with these drunken beasts. He would climb to their necks via the trunk, race them through jungles infested with lions and tigers, prod them to swim through swollen rivers, and engage them in fights which, according to the court historian, bore the appearance of Olympian death grapples. There was no fear in Akbar's heart. Once Akbar was on the verge of defeating the driver of another elephant. When the driver was thrown to the ground, Akbar daringly jumped onto the neck of the riderless animal, rescuing it from a hopeless position. Both the elephants fled the arena, doing considerable damage to life and property. Akbar escaped unhurt, much to the relief of a wide-eyed, breathless crowd of spectators. Now just compare this to teenagers in the United States in the 50s, their hot rods and so forth. This couldn't possibly compare to the episodes in the life of Akbar, who before he was even a teenager was racing elephants through the jungles. Akbar, however, could not bring himself to apply the same vigor to academic studies. Lal says, royal children in medieval times matured early. At 5, Akbar's grandfather, Babur, knew by heart the works of famous Persian poets. Akbar's father, Humayun, was well acquainted with the works of Persian and Turkey scholars before he was 7 years old. By these standards, Akbar at 5 was an ignoramus. His aversion to scholastic courses had not remained unnoticed, and Humayun was keen that the prince should quickly make up for the lost time. Humayun appointed an eminent scholar to direct the prince's education and to teach him to read. It was on November 20, 1547, that Akbar first went to school. True to the Mughal custom, the day was devoted to prayers, almsgiving, feeding the poor, and all other modes of propitiating the supernatural powers. Here's another vocabulary word, almsgiving. Almsgiving is giving something as money or food freely to relieve the poor. The day on which the prince embarked on formal studies was fixed after consultations with the court astrologers. Only one of them had the courage to tell the emperor that according to his calculations, the prince had little chance of attaining normal scholastic honors. You notice they were so concerned that they had to pick the exact day that it would be most propitious for him to become a scholar, and even on that day, they had to admit he wouldn't quite make it. So he told the emperor, Akbar will be wiser than the wisest of his age. His knowledge will, however, come from within himself. His sagacity will be rooted not in books, but in divine inspiration. Your Majesty may send him to a school, but the august prince is a school unto himself. He himself is destined to be a teacher of mankind. The august prince, august. The word means marked by majestic dignity or grandeur. He himself is destined to be a teacher of mankind. Humayun was pleased with this prediction. Nevertheless, Akbar was escorted to school. Humayun wanted his son to develop proficiency in fine arts as well. He therefore invited to Kabul two famous Persian painters. And asked them to initiate Akbar in the art of the brush. Their efforts did not, however, go beyond infusing in the child a lively interest in the works of the old masters. In later years, he became a connoisseur, so knowledgeable that he could identify the authorship of a work at first sight. Not only that, if a painting was the collective work of several artists, he found little difficulty in naming the designer of each part. The head preceptor was, however, not satisfied with Akbar's progress. So here we have the next new word, connoisseur. It's a French word. Connoisseur means expert, especially one who understands the details, technique, or principles of an art and is competent to act as a critical judge, one who enjoys with discrimination and appreciation of subtleties. So Akbar became a connoisseur of art. The word preceptor means teacher or tutor, the headmaster or principal of a school. The head preceptor was not satisfied with Akbar's progress. Discreetly, he informed Humayun more than once that the child's heart lay not in books, but in outdoor activities such as hunting, horse and camel riding, shooting, wrestling, and study of animal and bird habits. Several celebrated men of learning were subsequently appointed head preceptor, but Akbar proved to be the despair of them all. Humayun once reminded him in strong words of the part academic studies played in the makeup of a prince, but the remonstrance bore no result. He ignored his father's advice and continued to spend his time testing his strength and courage against animals known for the sharpness of their tooth and claw. In the end, Humayun realized the futility of imparting external knowledge to one endowed with inner knowledge of the rarest kind. Akbar was 9 years old when he began accompanying his father on military campaigns. Lal writes, "For the first time, Humayun took Akbar with him on a campaign of considerable military importance. Wearing armor, the prince rode majestically by the side of his father, not forgetting to keep his horse a couple of paces behind the royal charger. Not only was the prince invited to take part in the councils of war, he was encouraged to express freely his views on military and administrative problems. One day, Akbar surprised the emperor with suggestions to improve the effectiveness of the trenches that were being dug all around. His opinions were noted for their soundness and clarity. The next morning, Akbar went an inspection round. He took some engineers to task for not implementing his suggestions faithfully. He was averse to taking chances and spared himself no effort to ensure that his orders were carried out to the last dot. At 9+, he showed himself to be a keen observer of events around him. What's more, he took upon himself the duties of a leader with surprising facility. He was a born helmsman. Helmsman, that's our next vocabulary word. The person at the helm, the steersman, the one who guides the ship, the one who takes hold of the wheel, the one who takes charge. Helmsman. When Akbar was about 12 years old, he helped his father prepare to invade northern India. Lal says, Humayun sent Akbar occasionally to inspect the military camps and report to him on such administrative shortfalls as might catch his eye. His recommendations were invariably precise and practicable. Humayun listened to him with considerable attention, thus infusing in the young commander not only self-confidence, but also a sense of responsibility considered essential for development of his military genius. We can take many lessons as parents and teachers as to how we address our children, how we address the soul within and the Christ and the Buddha within them, how we expect of them great things and how they respond to our expectations because of our confidence, the confidence that we show to them not when they have become 20 years old, but when they are 2 and 3, that they are capable of performing certain tasks and projects and doing them well. Once Akbar brought to the notice of his father that a camp commandant had failed to make available to men under his charge the prescribed quantity of corn, pulses, and meat. The emperor not only suspended the officer, but also issued a mandate that in the future, a lapse of that nature would be considered an offense punishable with death. To Akbar, the comfort of the soldiers came first. He repeatedly urged the officers at every level not to spare any effort to make the troops happy. This solicitude for the welfare of the fighting man proved to be the key to his spectacular war successes in later years. One day when Humayun was resting following a strenuous chase in a hunt lasting several hours, one of his generals told him, "Your Majesty, I am wonderstruck at the precocity of Akbar." The precocity. Though young in years, he possesses the wisdom of Solomon and the courage of Alexander. In the camp, the prince conducts himself with the poise of a veteran general. His observations are uncanny, and seldom does he fail to admonish inefficiency and recognize merit. Even the most complex subtleties of strategy are not lost upon him. The prince, it seems, is blessed with many a hidden eye with which he scans the secrets of man and nature. I have no doubt that he is destined to reach the heights of greatness seldom scaled before. A place of honor and responsibility need to be given him in the expedition at hand. He is the shadow of God on earth. Isn't that a precious statement? He is the shadow of God on earth. Let us pray that the electronic presence of Akbar as a boy be over our children, and as the ascended Master El Moria over us, to guide us in the true way of raising up our children who have this precocity, raising them up the way they should go. Let us always remember we are dealing with souls who have lived many, many times before, who must not be coddled, not be allowed to compromise their honor, not be allowed to engage in mediocrity, and above all, not to fear surrender, selflessness, service, and sacrifice. So many parents are afraid to bring their children up to the level of their capacity. When we don't have high expectations of our children, how can they believe in themselves and have their own expectations? Remember, We have very precious souls who have been given to us in this community and throughout the world and beyond this community, everywhere upon earth. Splendid souls are embodying, and we must be prepared to receive them and teach them. So of the boy, Akbar, he is the shadow of God on earth. With him in the vanguard, the outcome of the campaign will never be in doubt. Vanguard, that's another vocabulary word. V-A-N-G-U-A-R-D, the troops moving at the head of an army, the forefront of an action or movement. Keepers of the flame, you are at the vanguard of El Moria's movement, his summit lighthouse, his great divine plan and strategy for the conquering of earth by light. The general's appraisal confirmed Humayun in his belief that Akbar was an instrument of divine will and power, and that he had been sent to earth for the realization of a purpose bigger than mere victories on the battlefield. You have victories that you have to win on the battlefield of your consciousness every day of your life, and if you don't know it, then you are not awake. How many of you are awake? Everybody's awake. Good. Stay awake. And don't practice denial. Victories on the battlefield of the mind and in the emotions. Victories on the battlefield of the physical body, to keep this body to be strong and tough for the march all the way to the victory. Yes, we have victories to win every single day. And when you have that victory over yourself in some compartment of being, keep the victory, hold on to it, don't lose ground, don't repeat the whole thing all over again 3 months from now, forgetting that you went through it already. Have your victory, hold the line. Don't give any territory up to the dweller on the threshold. In 1555, Humayun recovered his throne in Delhi, but the defeated rivals were still a force to be reckoned with. 6 months later, the emperor died, bequeathing a precarious foothold in India to his 13-year-old son. Precarious, dependent on uncertain premises, dubious, doubtful, dependent on chance, circumstances, unknown conditions, or uncertain developments. Precarious, like when you cross a footbridge and you're not quite sure it's going to hold till you get to the other side. Precarious. Initially, the new emperor ruled under the guidance of his chief minister, but within a few years, Akbar was governing on his own as absolute monarch. That means by the age of 15. The first half of Akbar's reign was devoted to consolidating and extending his empire. By the end of his 50-year reign, Akbar's slender inheritance had mushroomed into an empire that spanned a large part of India, Afghanistan, and modern Pakistan. Akbar felt it was his mission to unite Hindustan. He once said to a Jesuit missionary, "Each man has a mission to perform. Mine is to unite this great land." I want every adult, every child, everyone who hears this lecture to think for a moment now. Do you know in your heart what is your mission? Everyone has a mission to perform. Akbar said at 15, "Mine is to unite this great land." Akbar's conquest of the state of Gujarat in 1573 was one of the high watermarks of his military career. Lal describes Akbar's decisive action that was a major factor in his victory. Akbar received a report that Ibrahim, Hussein, and other insurgents were contemplating a revolt against the Mughal authority in Gujarat. Insurgents. That's another vocabulary word that you see on the screen. It's spelled I-N-S-U-R-G-E-N-T. An insurgent is a person who revolts against civil authority or an established government, one who acts contrary to the policies and decisions of his political party. So, Ibrahim Hussain and other insurgents were contemplating a revolt against the Mughal authority in Gujarat. Ibrahim had murdered a local chieftain who made no secret of his support for the Emperor Akbar. It was an act of treacherous defiance which Akbar was in no mood to overlook, much less condone. His reaction was sharp and immediate. "I shall take the field against him myself. We leave tomorrow morning. A high-speed squad of 500 horsemen will accompany me. The bulk of the army may follow later. Fast movement is the crying need. I must strike at once." Against the advice of some of his conservative counselors, Akbar left as planned. He pressed forward without stopping for the next 24 hours with such rapidity that when he reached his destination, only some 40 horsemen were still with him. From a passing Hindu priest, he learned that Ibrahim was entrenched in the great force at Sarnal, a small town built on the opposite bank of the river. Akbar's companions were alarmed and advised the emperor to wait for reinforcements before crossing the river. At this critical moment, as luck would have it, the vanguard of the main army came up. Even with this addition, the force numbered only 100 or 150. Notwithstanding this handicap, Akbar ordered an immediate attack. One soldier asked to be given the honor of leading the vanguard. Akbar's reply was typical. "Today there is no vanguard or rear, no right, left, or center. We have no army to divide. Let us keep together and set our hearts to the combat." That is the spirit of Akbar. That is the spirit of Abraham. It is the spirit of our beloved El Morya in every one of his lifetimes. May we have his spirit this day. This is my prayer for every one of you, for all people who love the will of God upon earth and see Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. My prayer this day is that the spirit of El Morya may be upon you, may be in your heart and in your chakras and in your mind, and that you may go forth from this anniversary of the Summit Lighthouse, never the same again, but to know what it means to walk in the shadow of one who as a small boy was called the shadow of God on earth. And so the small force reached the opposite bank safely. Meanwhile, Ibrahim had left the town with some 2,000 men and positioned himself on high ground in anticipation of the attack. The stretch between the river and the town was virtually impassable because of thick jungle, ditches, and masses of rock. Akbar threw caution to the winds and moved fearlessly towards Sarnal. Abul Faz's narrative of what followed bears quotation. Akbar displayed the power of God and slowly advanced by the narrow ways. Bhagwan Das was beside him, and when on every side there was hard fighting, 3 daring men rushed out from the ranks of the opponents against the lion-hearted sovereign. One of them lunged at Bhagwan Das and aimed his javelin at him, but the Bhagwan Das stood firm in his stirrups and attacked him with his spear. The Raja so smote that wretch with his spear that he was overthrown. Just then the other 2 attacked his majesty. The thorn bushes were an obstacle. When Akbar saw that those 2 evildoers were coming near him, he urged his horse on and jumped over the thorns in front of them. This frightened the attackers and they fled. When Akbar's royal party came forward, the rest of the opponents fled. This was the first time, says Lal, that Akbar was engaged in hand-to-hand fighting on a battlefield. After this, his courage and daredevilry became legendary. He was convinced that God was on his side and that his daring was only a reflection of the divine dynamo that propelled him. Combined with his great physical prowess, this belief became the biggest single architect of his greatness as a conqueror. His believing in himself, his believing that God was on his side because he was a servant of God's will, and that his daring was only a reflection of the divine dynamo that propelled him. He had everything in the right order, didn't he? He knew that here below he was the instrument of God. He never thought that he was God, but only his instrument. And because he was on God's side and the side of God's will, he was absolutely fearless. And that fearlessness comes to you when you stay prayed up, when you confess your sins, whether you write them in a letter and burn the letter, or whether you confide them in a minister or in myself. When you keep up with your penances, balancing the karma for this and that may come into your consciousness, or things that you may do or not do on a daily basis. When you make yourself right with God each night, when you go to your bed, you kneel in prayer, you call on the law of forgiveness, you review the day as the American natives have done for centuries, and you put into the sacred fire all that never should have been. You keep yourself right with God. There's not even a thin piece of paper between you and God as separation. When you are always one with God, that is when you have nothing to fear. When you fail to observe that ritual of daily confession to your own holy Christ self, the high priest at the altar of your being, when you let things pile up, and then you feel burdened, and then you start having psychological problems, and those problems go back for centuries of non-reckoning, not reckoning your accounts with God. So they pile up, they pile up, they pile up, and pretty soon you have severe mental and emotional problems, divisions in your four lower bodies, a division between your soul and your holy Christ self. This is what the path is all about. This is what the Summit Lighthouse is all about. The lighthouse of being, the mighty I Am presence. That lighthouse lights the way. You never have to feel bad about yourself again. You can go to confession, to the heart of hearts and the holy of holies of the altar of your being, and confess to those things that you no longer remember that you ever did in past lives, in all past lives, since the moment you left the first Maitreya's Mystery School. And you can ask that God give you that penance. You can take on your own penances, giving the violet flame daily for the transmutation of the records. This is the key to joy. It's the key to happiness. It's the key to freedom. It's the key whereby you can continually love. Love everyone you see, everyone you speak with, because you have also known that God is in you, and because you can love the God in yourself, you can love the God in all people. So if you can't love the God in yourself because you're not settling your accounts daily with God, then you see everything else falls apart. So let's make a New Year's resolution, the 7th and 8th of August, as we celebrate this anniversary. Let's put it into the flame every day. Prowess. This is another word on the screen. Prowess. Distinguished bravery, especially military valor and skill. Extraordinary ability. Prowess. Prowess. It's on the screen. Although he may have been known for his courage and daredevilry, Akbar executed his campaigns only after considerable thought and planning. Lal says that Akbar would go behind the veil of seclusion for 2 weeks. He would think over the buts and ifs of the planned campaign and draw in his mind a clear picture of the hardships that lay ahead. Then he would come out with a scheme of action that was comprehensive and immune from the danger of a cataclysmic setback. You need to put a lot of thought into planning. When is the best time to think? After you've said your prayers at night and you are quietly lying on your cot, and when you first awake in the morning, before you speak to anyone, before you get up, that is when the thoughts come from the higher planes where you have been, from your holy Christ self. Do a lot of thinking before you do any acting. A lot of people don't look before they leap, do they? Throughout Akbar's long reign, he faced nearly constant challenges from unruly princes of northern India, but he never shrank from combat nor accepted defeat. Lal comments on this adamantine quality of Akbar. Adamantine, you see the word on the screen? It's made of or having the quality of adamant, which is a stone such as a diamond that is of extremely hard substance, rigidly firm, unyielding, resembling the diamond in hardness or luster. Adamantine. There are times when you have to be absolutely adamant and have that quality of adamantine. There are other times when you need to give. Stymied by a thorny problem, most men in authority tended to get ruffled and complain to God about the injustices of his dispensations. Akbar was not made of this mold. He would take on both man and nature, even the great God himself, to get over the hurdles in his way. When a besieged commander once asked Akbar for more contingents and supplies, Akbar replied, "Battles are won more by willpower than by weapons. Push on, heedless of losses. Reinforcements are on the way. Good luck." Srivastava, his biographer, says, taking into consideration his military organization, the equipment and discipline of his troops, and his lifetime's unbroken record of victories in the field, one cannot but describe Akbar as a military genius. Akbar's genius was also apparent in the administration of his empire. Srivastava says, Akbar combined the rare gift of a grasp of broad original principles of administration with a knowledge of and attention to details of every departmental activity. And even more remarkable than these qualities was his passion for constant improvement. In addition, he found time apart from his numerous daily engagements to think and evolve schemes for the better working and greater supervision of the administration in all its branches. Akbar not only laid down rules and regulations, but also saw that they were properly implemented. This called for constant vigilance on the part of the emperor and his ministers and top-ranking officers. The extraordinary success of his administration was the result of Akbar's gift of judging human character and employing the right type of men on various posts of importance, the rigor with which he enforced his regulations, and his own vigilance. Lal says, Akbar was in the habit of giving lengthy verbal briefings to appointees to high administrative positions. The advice given by him to his son, Prince Murad, when the prince was about to assume governorship of a state, clearly reflects Akbar's priorities and the value he attached to moral integrity. Abul Faz records the following summary of the emperor's exhortations to the prince. It is important that action be taken only after careful thought. In eating, clothing, sleeping, and walking, men should seek to increase wisdom and not pleasure or the fattening of the body. In governing, the idea should be to protect the feeble from the strong arm of oppression. Improvement of the country and the army should be advanced. Company should always be kept with the good. Do not associate with praters, somebody who just prates on, talking about nothing. Don't associate with such people. Loquacious persons, again, those who never stop chattering. Drunkards, foul-mouthed persons, buffoons, bad-hearted men, base people, the envious, ignorant sellers of wisdom, handsome youths, and young women. Do not turn away from the bitter disposition of the truthful, and be not angry with them. Be not vexed on account of the superior enlightenment of the well-intentioned. Consider abundance of well-wishing as an ornament of dominion, not as a reason for neglect. In other words, don't rest upon your laurels. Judge nobility of caste and high birth from the personality. Do not judge goodness from grandfathers or greatness from the seed. Take each individual and judge him by his own works, not by his ancestors or his bloodline. Study the daily doings and manners of your companions. Be intent in prayer. Do not let reprisals pass beyond bounds, and do not attend to such matters when angry or hungry. It's very good advice when you have to correct someone, when you have to tell them what they did is not right. Be sure you have no anger in you, and be sure you are not hungry. Akbar knew that when he was hungry, maybe he didn't feel as good as when he was full. Maybe his blood sugar dropped a little. Reprisal, the act or practice in international law of resorting to force short of war in retaliation for damage or loss suffered. The regaining of something as by recapture. So do not let your reprisals, your taking back what is yours, pass beyond bounds, and do not attend to such matters when angry or hungry. Be not offended by diversity of religion. We'll hear a lot more in a little while about Akbar's view of religion. But even today, people are offended by another person's religion which isn't like theirs. Struggle hard to sit in the shade of peace with all. Do not stain your soul with revenge. Do not take the path of deceit when inflicting retribution. Keep secrets to yourself, and except for one or two right-thinking and profound persons, do not reveal your thoughts. Do not refer deliberation to an unsuitable assemblage. Don't conduct a meeting among peoples who are not suited to the topic of your meeting or cannot contribute to the subject. First inquire separately and then in full meeting, but do not indicate who your private advisor was. Do not distress the relation, the intimate, and the neighbor by angry glances. In other words, do not burden your relative or your friend or your neighbor by angry glances. If a thing can be remedied by kindness, do not have recourse to terror. Do not seek the destruction of the fallen, nor follow up those who are rising, the flying. Do not open the lips to utter oaths. Receive warning from others, not from oneself. That is, listen to what others have to tell you. Whoever gathers wisdom from the teaching of the world learns without the learner's pain. In other words, learn from others' mistakes rather than from your own, and save yourself the pain. Forget not anyone who does you service, and strive to recompense it. Postpone not to the morrow the work of today. Reckon a good name as eternal life. Keep aloof from jesting and toying, especially with one who is higher or older than yourself. Regard the shining sword and the pen as the two arms of power. Commit the first, the sword, to the brave and frank-hearted, and commit the second, the pen, to the contented and right-acting. Soldiers get a great name by four things. First, loyalty to their master. Second, love to their comrades. Third, obedience. Fourth, experience. The general is famed who always looks after the pay, the arms, and the cattle of his followers, and who is always prepared. And he wins their hearts by giving them gifts and honors, and looks after the survivors of deceased soldiers. Shrivastava says, although a benevolent despot with all power concentrated in his hands, Akbar followed the democratic method. Benevolent, that's another vocabulary word. Benevolent, B-E-N-E-V-O-L-E-N-T. Marked by or disposed to doing good, organized for the purpose of doing good, marked by or suggestive of goodwill. So he was a benevolent despot, an autocrat who did good. He formed his opinions and decided problems, whether civil or military, on merit. He usually took steps on important matters after consulting his ministers and other high officials. The account given by a European eyewitness on his deliberations deserves to be quoted. The following is the method the king employs in deliberations. He asks each counselor privately for his own opinion, and then himself decides upon the course which seems to be supported by the largest number and the most experienced. He asks their advice even about steps upon which he has already made up his mind, saying to the nobles, "This is what I think should be done. Do you agree?" They reply, "Salam, O king," whereupon he says, "Then let it be carried out." If, however, any one of them does not agree with him, he listens patiently and sometimes even alters his own opinion. Shrivastava says, Akbar was very strict in the matter of implementing his regulations. There was hardly any minister or captain who was not censured on account of his failure in implementing the emperor's schemes or carrying out his orders. His greatest captains and most favorite advisors, including his own son and heir, were sometimes forbidden the court or demoted according to the gravity of their mistakes in carrying out the royal projects. Writes one eyewitness, the king's severity towards error and misdemeanor committed by officials in the course of government business is remarkable. He is most stern with offenders against the public faith. And so Almoria remains to this day. Far be it that we should minimize our faults when we know that Almoria is a stickler to remove from us our faults. The key here is to let that mind be in you, which is in Almoria. And at the level that Almoria has his expectations of us, so let us rise to that level rather than accepting our own excuses for our own misconduct or errors. And so this writer, speaking of him, says, hence all are afraid of his severity and strive with all their might to do as he directs and desires. For the king has most precise regard for right and justice in the affairs of government. Notwithstanding that Akbar was stern to his nobles and vassals, so that none dared lift his head too high, he was very benevolent and kind to the common people. He allowed them to approach him, and he willingly listened to their grievances. An observer wrote, he was pleased to accept their presents, taking them into his hands and holding them to his breast, which he never did with the rich gifts brought to him by his nobles. Lal describes Akbar's physical attributes. He was of wheatish complexion, medium height, long arms and hands, extraordinary breadth of the chest, penetrating eyes, the strength of a Samson, sharp features with a fleshy wart on the left side of the nose, conjoined well to produce an image of balance, strength, and rhythm. Biographer Vincent Smith adds to this portrait, Akbar's voice had a peculiar richness. His whole mien, that's another vocabulary word, M-I-E-N. It means air or bearing, especially as expressive of mood or personality. It means demeanor, appearance, or aspect. His whole mien was in such perfect accord with the ideal of kingly dignity that anybody, even at the first glance, would recognize him as a king. Srivastava says, Akbar was simple and moderate, dignified and reserved. Although he was by no means garrulous, there's another vocabulary word, garrulous. Somebody who is garrulous is pointlessly or annoyingly talkative. People who talk too much do not respect the God within you, do not respect time, space, energy, or silence. Although he was by no means garrulous, whenever he spoke, he expressed himself briefly, clearly, and thoughtfully. In fact, he was eloquent in speech. He possessed a sense of humor, was at times witty, and indulged in repartee. Smith notes, however, that Akbar was not always the picture of serenity. Akbar had a naturally quick temper, which occasionally carried him away in a gust of passion. Such outbreaks of wrath at times caused him to execute substantial, although irregular acts of summary justice, as when he punished his uncle and his foster brother for cruel murders. On one recorded occasion, a sudden fit of anger caused him to commit a shocking act. He caused a negligent lamplighter to be hurled from the battlements of the palace and dashed to pieces as a punishment for a trivial transgression. Negligent is another vocabulary word. Negligent, marked by or given to neglect, especially habitually or culpably not taking prudent care, marked by a carelessly easy manner. One author justly sums up this side of the emperor's character by observing that the prince rarely loses his temper, but if he should fall into a passion, it is impossible to say how great his wrath may be. The good thing about it is that he presently regains his calmness, and that his wrath is short-lived, quickly passing from him. For in truth he is naturally humane, gentle, and kind. Srivastava tells us that Akbar on the whole lived an abstemious life, practicing inward and outward austerities. Abstemious, that's another vocabulary word. It is spelled A-B-S-T-E-M-I-O-U-S. It means sparing, especially in eating or drinking, sparingly used or indulged in. Abstemious. Even before he had crossed his 38th year, Akbar had begun observing moderation in food and drink. He gradually reduced his animal diet and did not touch meat for more than 3 months in the year. He used to say that from his early days, whenever meat dishes were served, he did not relish them. He took this as an indication of God's will that he should have compassion for animal life. He did not sleep for more than 3 hours a night. Although sleep brings health of body, he said, yet as life is the greatest gift of God, it were better that it should be spent in wakefulness. Sleep and food are means of the renewal of strength in seeking to do the will of God. Miserable man in his folly regards them as an end. Sleep and food should not be seen as an end, but as a means. Regarding Akbar's scholarship, Srivastava writes that although unlettered, Akbar was a highly well-informed and learned man. He possessed a wonderfully rich library consisting of 24,000 rare books. The books belonged to various subjects such as literature, poetry, history, philosophy, psychology, astronomy, theology, etc. They were read to him regularly. So he had his court ministers read to him by the hour out of these books. And he could repeat whatever he heard. He was also fond of the company of learned men, scientists, engineers, philosophers, poets, theologians, and so forth. He used to discuss diverse subjects with them. Akbar's memory was so sharp and prodigious, that's another vocabulary word. Prodigious is spelled Prodigious. Prodigious means being an omen, portentous, exciting amazement or wonder, extraordinary in bulk, quantity, or degree, enormous. Akbar's memory was so sharp and prodigious that he remembered everything that he heard from learned men or from the books that were read to him. Consequently, he was able to argue abstruse points of philosophy and theology so well that hardly anyone could guess that he was illiterate. Akbar took an equal interest in the education of his children. Akbar loved his children. He gave them the best education possible and employed them in the work of administration. He personally supervised their upbringing and education and took a great deal of interest in the molding of their character. We are told by Father Montserrat, who was appointed tutor to Prince Murad, that the emperor would ask Murad to recite before him every day whatever he had learned either by heart or from reading stories. With this incentive, the boy worked hard. He paid equal attention to the education of his daughters, who were taught to read and write and were trained in other ways by matrons. One of the most significant features of Akbar's reign was his policy of religious tolerance. He was the first monarch in the medieval age to recognize that truth existed in all religions. Akbar was raised as a Muslim. In his day, Muslims, not Hindus, held the powerful positions in the government of India. But during Akbar's reign, more Hindus than ever before were employed in government. As was the tradition of the day, Akbar had numerous wives. He married non-Muslims and allowed his wives to practice their rites inside the palace. Although previous Muslim rulers had married non-Muslims, they did not respect their customs. Akbar halted the destruction of Hindu temples and stopped the practice stipulated in the Quran of taxing all non-Muslims. As Akbar's reign progressed, he introduced Hindu festivals at court and let his hair grow long in the Hindu style. He also promoted the Hindu arts and letters. He invited Hindu as well as Muslim painters to the court and sponsored an official Hindu poet laureate. "It is my duty," said Akbar, "to be in good understanding with all men. If they walk in the way of God's will, interference with them would be reprehensible. Reprehensible. Worthy of or deserving a reprimand, blamable." Akbar would blame himself if he interfered with another man's relationship with God as long as he was doing God's will. And if they do not walk in the way of God's will, they are under the malady of ignorance and deserve my compassion. One of the most notable Hindus in Akbar's court was Birbal. Srivastava says, Birbal was a great favorite and boon companion of Akbar. He probably wielded greater influence over Akbar than even his personal advisor, Abul Faz. Though not a man of high educational attainments, Birbal possessed natural gifts of a high order. He excelled all courtiers in Akbar's service in the gift of wit and humor, and in the art of conversation, storytelling, and repartee, and in the art of pleasing his royal patron. He is said to have been a poet of no ordinary merit. Many stories, anecdotes, and witty sayings attributed to him have come down to posterity and are cherished. Lal records an incident in which Birbal alone saved Akbar from a deep depression. Depression descended upon Akbar often when he was in the glow of wine and women. Tradition has it that once when he was in the dainty and beautifully decorated house of Mariam, his Portuguese wife, Akbar suddenly became pensive, ordered a horse to be brought, and rode away to the solitude of a weather-beaten wooden hut 10 miles away. He remained there for 2 days and nights and returned only when his friend and confidant Birbal went there and humored him out of his doubts and misgivings. Here is one anecdote that has come down to us about Birbal and Akbar. One day Akbar decided to dye the gray hairs of his beard black. He asked Birbal, "Do you think this dye has any effect on the brain?" Without even a moment's thought, Birbal replied, "One who applies hair dye in advanced age has no brain that he should worry about." "How is that?" Akbar demanded. "Your Majesty," Birbal explained, "would anyone having a brain ever engage himself in the vain effort to regain lost youth?" Akbar laughed heartily. We suppose he did not dye the white hairs of his beard black. Abul Faz said that Akbar's entire life was a search after truth. Srivastava writes, Akbar looked on the performance of his duties as an act of divine worship. Isn't that a most exciting concept? I am certain that Al Moria has been trying to get every one of us to see that every moment of our lives, waking and sleeping. An act of divine worship, the performance of his duties, he saw as an act of divine worship. Smith says, Akbar was by nature a mystic. Now it comes out. Who sought earnestly, like his Sufi friends, to attain the ineffable bliss of direct contact with a divine reality. Now and again he believed or fancied that he had succeeded. His temperament was profoundly melancholic, and there seems to be some reason to suspect that at times he was not far from the danger of falling into a state of religious mania. His ambition and intense interest in all the manifold affairs of this world saved him from that fate and brought him back from dreams to the actualities of human life. Lal describes the challenge Akbar faced in reconciling his religious devotion with his role as king and conqueror. Kingship and sainthood do not ordinarily mix. This was especially so in medieval times, when cold-hearted, acquisitive ambitions ran riot and compelled the rulers to abandon considerations of humanity. The sword was then the only dependable means to keep the egotistic, unpatriotic self-seekers at bay. Challenges from outside could be met effectively only by a relentless show of strength. Further, Akbar made war an end by itself, and the glory of conquest the surest means to maintain stability. It is therefore not surprising that, like his predecessors, Akbar too built pyramids of human heads and staged grim massacres. But there was a difference. Akbar went down on his knees following an orgy of butchery. He was invariably penitent and sought forgiveness for the pain and misery caused. Though Akbar's deviations from the path of the saints were many, he inwardly yearned to be one. Srivastava says, Akbar used to spend the early hours of the morning every day in a lonely corner of his palace, praying in orthodox Muslim fashion. But some years after, his religious views underwent a change. He made a comparative study of various faiths in a scientific manner, and he came to the conclusion that there was truth in every religion, and that there were everywhere some pious men and abstemious thinkers. Abstemious thinkers. Eventually, he ceased to identify himself with the doctrine and rites of any individual religion, but adopted the forms of worship and ceremonies of several faiths. For example, he revered the sun and the light after the Parsi and Hindu fashion, respected the pictures and images of Christ and the Virgin Mary, practiced non-injury of life, as did the Jains, and followed many Hindu customs and ceremonies. In the matter of religious belief and practice, the members of every faith began to think that he was one of them. He felt inclined towards the Hindu as well as the Muslim Sufi ideal of asceticism and renunciation, And he said, "Whoever by destiny withdraws his affection from all worldly concerns attains to divine love, which is above all others. Although I am the master of so vast a kingdom, and all the appliances of government are to my hand, yet since true greatness consists in doing the will of God, my mind is not at ease in this diversity of sects and creeds, and my heart is oppressed by this outward pomp and circumstance. With what satisfaction can I undertake the conquest of empire? How I wish for the coming of some pious man who will resolve the distractions of my heart. If I could but find anyone capable of governing the kingdom, I would at once place this burden upon his shoulders and withdraw therefrom." Soon after, says Srivastava, Akbar seems to have realized that worldly duties and pursuit of true religion are not really incompatible, and that the source of unhappiness is attachment to worldly things. The teaching of none other than Gautama Buddha. He said, "The source of misery is self-aggrandizement and unlawful desires." 1575 was a turning point in Akbar's religious pursuits. At the beginning of 1575, says Smith, Akbar was conscious of having gained a long succession of remarkable and decisive victories, which left him without an important enemy in the world known to him. We are told that at this time he spent whole nights in praising God. His heart was full of reverence for him who is the true giver. From a feeling of thankfulness for his past successes, he would sit many a morning alone in prayer and meditation on a large flat stone of an old building which lay near the palace in a lovely spot. With his head bent over his chest, he would gather the bliss of the early hours of dawn. Thus, with his military victories behind him, Akbar felt free to pursue the burning desire of his heart, to reconcile the diversity of religious creeds. To this end, he built in 1575 the Ibadat Khana, or house of worship, where scholars and holy men met to discuss theology. Akbar at first confined these discussions to various factions within the Muslim community. 2 or 3 years later, Akbar underwent some sort of spiritual catharsis. Srivastava describes the incident. Akbar had undertaken a hunt near the town of Behera. He crossed the river and ordered his nobles and officers to drive the wild animals from a distance of 50 miles and enclose them in a ring. It took 4 days to accomplish it. The hunt began. I will give you the vocabulary word for catharsis. Catharsis. It is a purgation. It is a purging of oneself. That's what catharsis means. A purification or purgation of the emotions, as pity and fear, primarily through art. A purification or purgation that brings about spiritual renewal or release from tension. A catharsis is an elimination of a complex by bringing it to consciousness and affording it expression. The elimination of a complex, any kind of psychological complex, by bringing it to consciousness and affording it expression. So the hunt began, but a strange thing happened to Akbar, as a result of which there was an extraordinary change in his demeanor. All of a sudden, he put a stop to the hunting and ordered that no one should touch the game and that all the captured animals be set free. He had the long locks of his hair, which was allowed to grow in imitation of Indian fashion, clipped short. He distributed large sums of money in charity. The same day he crossed the river back to the camp. It is difficult to say what exactly had happened to Akbar. He was certainly overcome by some kind of religious ecstasy that Sufis and yogis experience during meditation. One man who was not far from the royal camp says that Akbar had a revelation from God, and the place where this incident took place became known as Small Mecca. Abul Faz writes, "As attainment follows upon search, the lamp of vision became brilliant. A sublime joy took possession of his bodily frame. The attraction of cognition of God cast its ray. What the chiefs of purity and deliverance had searched for in vain had been revealed to him. It was widely believed that the emperor had a novel spiritual experience, and that in a vision he had a direct communion with God. Soon after this spiritual experience, Akbar planned, as a kind of thanksgiving, the distribution of charity on an extensive scale. He sent instructions to his officers at the capital to fill in a tank in the courtyard of his palace, which was 60 feet by 60 feet and 9 feet deep, with gold, silver, and copper coins. On the emperor's return to his capital, the money was distributed among deserving men and women in the course of 3 years. Akbar took handfuls of gold, silver, and copper coins and bestowed them on all kinds of people. At about the same time, Akbar built, at state expense, a series of houses for the poor who had no dwellings of their own. He also made arrangements for regularly feeding the hungry. Although no one really knew what happened to Akbar on the hunting grounds, all the chroniclers agree that he was never the same again. Lal says, debates in the Abadat Khana gained in frequency and in depth. The Muslims taking part in the debates failed to find for Akbar the truth he was seeking. Their vehement assertions and counter-assertions left him cold and groping. The self-righteousness in argument and arrogance of the disputants convinced him of their unfitness to be religious leaders. Though hurt greatly by their indiscretions, Akbar never lost his temper. He invariably sought to pacify passions and urged the spokesmen of factions to use their brains rather than bricks to demolish the offending expostulations. His exhortations proved of little avail. Frustrated, Akbar decided to enlarge the area of his inquiry. First the Shiite and then Hindu, Jain, Christian, and Zoroastrian divines were invited to participate in the debates. He was desperately in search of formulae which could ensure and advance the maximum good of the largest number of his subjects. The empire was expanding rapidly, and he felt that unless some unifying principles were evolved, the task of consolidation would be impossible. How right he was. The lessons of history were too patent to be ignored. Muslim rulers had held sway over Delhi for the last nearly 8 centuries, but none of them was able to weld the people into a nation. Plans for the future were gradually evolving in Akbar's mind. As a first step, he decided to cut the ground from under the feet of Muslim religious teachers and acquire for himself the powers of legislation in religious matters. For too long, Akbar thought, had the priestly class fattened itself on the ignorance and credulity of the poor. Their vested interests, he felt, were a threat to the solidarity of the kingdom. Akbar's decision to diffuse them once and for all was rooted in the compulsive ambition to transform his domains into a secular state where people belonging to different religions would be able to live side by side with honor and dignity. In the context of the 16th century, this was a revolutionary concept, one that could not but arouse hostility and criticism among a section of the population. The risk involved could have deterred a lesser man, but Akbar remained undaunted. Akbar stated that he was to be the final arbiter and interpreter of Muslim law. If factions disagreed as to the interpretation of the Quran, he was to decide which interpretation was correct. You can see the handwriting on the wall. In his house of worship, Akbar himself frequently presided over the often tempestuous meetings. That's another vocabulary word today, tempestuous, of relating to or resembling a tempest, turbulent, stormy. Tempestuous meetings. Lal writes, Akbar and his personal advisor, Abul Faz, insisted upon a mathematical approach to problems taken up for discussion. When once a Muslim religious teacher asserted that every child was born with an instinctive bias in favor of Islamic principles, Akbar's reaction was typical. Well, let us put this claim to test. We shall place 20 newborn babies in the charge of a nurse. For a year, no one will be permitted to meet or talk to them. At the end of that period, we shall examine them and see if they are prone to emit sounds even remotely suggestive of Muhammad or any other champion of Islam. The experiment was duly carried out. All the one-year-olds were found to be dumb when their period of segregation came to an end. This was perhaps the first and only instance of scientific inquiry into human behavior in medieval times. Father Montserrat, the historian of the first Jesuit mission to Akbar's court, records how earnest the emperor was in his religious inquiries. The king was, he writes, always pondering in his mind which nation had retained the true religion of God, and to this question he constantly gave a most earnest thought. He devised the following ingenious method of settling the problem. On a certain night in 1582, he ordered all the nobles, the religious leaders, both of Hindus and Muslims, and the Christian priests, to be summoned to the inner palace. He placed the nobles in line according to their rank, bade all the wise men and doctors of religion take their place before him, and then asked them questions on various points. At the conclusion of this discussion, the king briefly addressed all who had been present. He said, I perceive that there are varying customs and beliefs of varying religious paths, for the teachings of the Hindus, the Muslims, the Parsis, the Jews, and the Christians are all different. But the followers of each religion regard the institutions of their own religion as better than those of any other. Not only so, but they strive to convert the rest to their own way of belief. If these refuse to be converted, they not only despise them, but also regard them for this very reason as their enemies. And this causes me to feel many serious doubts and scruples, anxiety. Wherefore I desire that on appointed days the books of all the religious laws be brought forward, and that the doctors meet together and hold discussions so that I may hear them, and that each one may determine which is the truest and mightiest religion. Srivastava writes, the result of this discussion was what Akbar had foreseen. The disputants pointed out the defects of the religions of their rivals, and thus the unsuitability of all the prevalent religions for being established as a national religion was proved beyond a doubt. Some days after, Akbar addressed a special assembly of his nobles, masters of learning, and his military leaders. He said, for an empire ruled by one head, it was a bad thing to have the members divided among themselves and at variance with each other. There is discord between the many kinds of religious laws observed in the Mughal territory, some being not only different from but hostile to others, whence it comes about that there are as many factions as there are religions. We ought therefore to bring them all into one, but in such fashion that they should be both one and all, with the great advantage of not losing what is good in any one religion while gaining whatever is better in another. In that way, honor would be rendered to God, peace would be given to the peoples, and security to the empire. You can see on the screen now the thought form of peoples of all religion arriving to the heart of the inner retreat in 1992. That is Akbar's dream to the present hour. With that, Akbar took a bold new step. He founded a monotheistic Unitarian religion called Dina-i-Ilahi, which means divine faith. Monotheistic, want to be sure you get that pronunciation. It's spelled M-O-N-O, theistic, but it's pronounced monotheistic. Of or relating to the doctrine or belief that there is but one God. So he founded a monotheistic Unitarian religion called Dina-i-Ilahi. He himself occupied the position of spiritual leader, not lacking at all in his self-confidence. To bring about unity and diversity was Akbar's aim, says Lal. Akbar genuinely believed that nobody was better equipped than he himself to bring about the desired transformation. The cardinal principle of Islam, that God is one and besides that God there is no other God, was the hub around which the Dina-i-Ilahi revolved. Akbar did not spell out to his council either the essentials or the externals of his plan. He apparently put his trust in the law of evolution and hoped that the Dina-i-Ilahi would gather content as it progressed. He restricted himself to merely defining the broad aim. Some of the religious practices of the new religion were that in the morning, the midday, at sunset, and at midnight, prayers were enjoined. The sun and the fire were the objects of veneration, and everybody was expected to rise when the lamps were lit in the evening. No manifestation of God was as effulgent and sacred as the sun. Hence the desirability of doing it obeisance in the morning. Effulgent. The pronunciation is effulgent, marked by or as if by brightly shining light, extremely radiant, brilliant. No manifestation of God was as effulgent and sacred as the sun. Hence the desirability of doing it obeisance in the morning. In 1583, an edict of complete tolerance was issued. All those who had been converted to Islam by force were allowed to re-embrace the religion of their birth. Meat eating was banned on certain days of the year. To the long list of the festivals of Hindustan were added the 14 festivals of Persia. All citizens of the empire were expected to attend these festivals. Akbar's doctrine-bound subjects, however, were not ready for his revolutionary ideas. He was an Akhenaten in his own time. Lal writes, Akbar erred grievously in prescribing a ritual of initiation within his religion that gave the appearance of entry into a new faith. Abul Faz described the initiation ceremony. When a novice bears on his forehead the sign of earnestness of purpose, and he be daily inquiring more and more, His Majesty accepts him and admits him on a Sunday when the world-illuminating sun is in its highest splendor. At the above-mentioned time of everlasting auspiciousness, the novice with his turban in his hands puts his head on the feet of His Majesty. His Majesty then stretches out the hand of favor, raises up the supplicant, and replaces the turban on his head. His Majesty then gives the novice a metal disc which is to be placed inside his turban. On the disc is engraved the great name, Akbar, and His Majesty's symbolic motto, Allahu Akbar. To a Muslim, prostration before a human being is a sin. Hence there rose a cry that Akbar was assuming to himself the role of the prophet, and that the new order was a profanity that ran counter to the injunctions of Islam. The Muslim religious teachers also insisted that Allahu Akbar meant Allah is Akbar, and not Allah is great, as commonly understood by Muslims. The controversy spread to all parts of the kingdom. Despite the explanations issued from time to time by the two archpriests of his new religion, the belief gained ground that Akbar was out to subvert Islam. The emperor did not relent and made no move to change the ceremonial. This lent credence, the word is pronounced credence, it's spelled C-R-E-D-E-N-C-E, mental acceptance as true or real, credence. This lent credence to the charge and was perhaps responsible for the people's rejection of his innovation. The ceremonial of initiation as laid down by Akbar bears a marked resemblance to the ritual with which Hindu novices are accepted as chelas by their gurus. The disc-carrying members were required to take a vow of discipleship, a pledge to serve the emperor, if need be, with their property, life, honor, and religion. Akbar was in search of a house of God in which everybody could enter without compunction, say his prayers, and work for self-realization. It is clear that he intended to install himself as the supreme arbiter of disputations. Arbiter, a person with power to decide a dispute, a judge. Arbiter, a person or agency having absolute power of judging and determining. He intended to install himself as the supreme arbiter of disputations among various sections of the Islamic Brotherhood. But this was far from donning the robes of the prophet. He became an infallible arbiter within the framework of Islam, not outside it. His pilgrimages and the reverence with which he received the sacred relics of Islam from Mecca show that the malicious allegations by his detractors were a lie. Unfortunately, Akbar's last years were troubled by intrigues and the rebellious conduct of his son, Prince Salim. Akbar died in 1605, and Prince Salim became emperor. And what became of his new religion? Akbar had never demanded that his countrymen espouse his beliefs. Lal says, Akbar was perhaps the first monarch in the long history of Hindustan to realize that ideological concepts could not be forced down the throats of a people by the sword. Thus the followers of Akbar's new religion never numbered more than a few thousand. In the end, the creed died with its creator. In fact, some of his subjects still believed that their emperors secretly favored one religion over the other. And when Akbar was on his deathbed in 1605, each religious group was waiting to hear what name of God would be last on the emperor's lips. Akbar, of course, remained silent on the issue. Thus ends the saga of one who sought not only to unify his people, but to lead them to the highest truth. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. So now when you have a picture of Akbar in your room, such as the quaint one that's been on the screen, you have a little more of the idea of the tremendous virtues of this man, the talents, the genius, the uncanny oneness with God. It is easy to see him walking down the highway of life as we remember him as a son of Enoch, a master mason on the pyramids, as Abraham, as Melchior, as the beloved King Arthur. We see him in all these lifetimes, Becket, more, and more again. And finally, as the great adept who sponsors and fathers Theosophy, with Kuthumi, Saint Germain, the Mahachohan, and Serapis Bey. So we see that what we are is cumulative. What we are not, we can still acquire by the prodigious use of our faculties, our time, and all the teachings that have been given unto us. Another point is to call down from your causal body the great momentums of the past, and to set yourself, whether it's 5, 10, 15 minutes, or 30 minutes a day, to the violet flame, so you can be a street sweeper. Sweep the streets of the subconscious and the unconscious. Get all those records, all the pain, etc. Get it into the flame. You can't ultimately have resolution without the violet flame, no matter how long you lay on a psychiatrist's couch. You've got to have the violet flame to get out the spots on the garment of being. So, my call to you today in the name of Akbar, in the name of Akhenaten, is to come into the unity of God within you. And do not be a compromiser for anyone. Do not compromise your honor, your standards, the level of the path that you desire to follow. Get rid of the fear that loved ones may abandon you, or others will not think well of you, or you will not be popular with the world. Set a standard, live by it, walk by it, and all men will respect you. Live by no standard, but do the bidding of the world. Neither men nor masters will respect you. Don't be afraid to be who you are. Take the lesson from all of Almoria's embodiments. He became who he was. He had absolutely no compunctions about being who he was, even as a child. He was true to himself.